Okay, so the next panel is about the role of state ownership in media concentration, whether that is good or not. Coming from a country where 3 decades ago we had only one state broadcaster, 2 hours of television a day, and an American movie on Sunday, my answer would be definitely that's not good. But that was 30 years ago, back in Romania, in Eastern Europe. Is state ownership good in the media? We'll hear first from Huseyin about the Turkish experience.
I think maybe this place is better. I have some papers. During the course of this involvement with this project and the recent discussions, and also meantime with Joe Pavlik and Professor Rector Alfonso Sanchez.
Tavernero is the second.
Yes.
Difficult.
Sorry, yeah, and I really come to conclusion that maybe a little bit provocative, but now we are in the age of revolution in media affairs or studies. That's what I have observed, and usually I have the first revolution is in fact I think the paradigm change in research. I have been teaching since last 15 years at the master's and PhD levels, research methodology and data analysis, but the same problem stays. So like the same thing, when they asked me to talk about the state, the role of state on media and on ownership, I don't know what is the definition of state. So what is the authoritarian state, and some of them says no neoliberal liberal authoritarian state, semi-authoritarian state, whatever. So first we have to come to reconceptualization, and I think Joe really perfectly described that we need the reconceptualization, description of the terminology. What is the content spaces? Whatever the media ecosystem is, and according to them, I can much more precisely can talk about the relationship between the state-owned media and the concentration. And I think maybe we should include the internal pluralism, message pluralism. You know, it is not only the market share. For sure, now the current concentration definition, dominant paradigm, and its assumptions should be re-questioned. Then we can have a paradigm change. I am talking about the Thomas Kuhn's terminology. So in Turkish case, I really don't want to go into the public choice theory and the public interest theory, but Turkish case is really interesting. And just then we can go and just tell me the last thing. We have to look at the transformation or the evolution of the state broadcasting company. Then each stage, the pros and cons change. 1950s, 60s, it was very important because of the state binding, nation binding, that kind of dominant theories in comparative politics and the theories of democracy, etc., in political science. But really Turkish case, what I have seen, represent very interesting thing now. Till up to 2012, the TRT, Turkish Radio TV Broadcasting Corporation, heavily subsidized, not subsidized, financed by the government. These guys now really better than Fox TV, better than CNN Turk, better than Al Jazeera. They changed the game. It is owned by the state. It is like the same dilemma between privatization and liberalization. Okay, it is privatized, but it is my, state is like a car and the government is the driver. Car stays, it depends on who drives, the government, the coalition. So I sell them. It is privatized, but still monopoly. We see in many countries, same thing. Now, really interesting. These guys came from another, I call it semi-theocratic authoritarian regime, Turkish case. Not neo-authoritarian or whatever, this is my own definition. So what I want to say here, these guys came from another media conglomerate. And now it is operated like their ratings exploded. Revenues coming from the advertising boomed. And you know, if you ask me now, most private owners are under the not fair competition. 2 billion Turkish lira means almost 1 billion, close to $1 billion is the given to the Turkish state-owned broadcasting company. They are now working, they just produce best reality shows. They produce best documentaries. They produce best TV series. I mean, the gentleman from Chile, we were talking about that new programs are really #1, and they're really gonna sell. So they are doing much better. And you know what they do? They are like acting like Hollywood type of business model. Their program content creation or content generation structure was based on studios, not anymore. They outsource. And the quality of the programs and the diversity of programs, now there is a message pluralism, it is really plural. But when it comes to news, it is the voice of the government, but same for the others. So in that case, state ownership and the concentration levels, in Turkish case, really interesting example. You know why? Now the state-owned media broadcasting company practices unfair behavior, competition, because it is their business model. They, excuse me, let me just closely go into my notes. I have taken some notes. Interestingly, business models, revenue generation models, operating models, extremely professional. The CEO, the general managers, much better than American or Western trained CEOs and general managers. Things changed last 2 years. And now it used to be last 2011 to 0.3% market share. Both the revenue, the advertisings and market share in revenues and the market shares and ratings was below the 1%. Now almost 10%. So this is really interesting case, and I just don't want to go to pros and cons because everybody knows about what is the pros and cons. But we have to look at the transformation of state-owned media so that by analyzing each phase of state-owned media during the course of transformation stages, then the pros and cons change, then we can spot, if we spot the phase, then we can spot the pros and cons. It is a dynamic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to build on that, the transformation of state.
The microphone, I suppose, right?
It's here.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
Yes, you got it.
But I have. Okay.
Both.
Okay. Follow up on that. The transformation of state media into public media in the part of the world in Eastern Europe has been a failed experiment. And most of the stations with more competition from private television stations, they basically lost the ratings. In Hungary, they got down to 1%, 2% from 100% within 7 years. Now you're telling us that in Turkey, actually, they started to actually behave as a commercial player to just promote propaganda. When did that happen, and what was the?
I know the general manager, the guy.
What was the? What triggered that? What triggered that?
I'm sorry?
What triggered that?
Politically he was assigned because, he needed to create a new, Tayyip Erdogan wanted to create new media company. On the other hand, the company, like big conglomerate, Turkuaz Group, he said 10 businessmen should come up with $100 million. And everybody come with $100 million and bought that. So really represent interest in case because of the political power, because of the control. That's typical authoritarian approach to media ownership.
Yeah. Thank you. Going to China, Minhang, we dance in our chains, the role of state ownership, pros and cons.
Thank you.
What is yours?
So I suppose to answer the question, the pros and cons of state ownership. This is my answer. We dance in our chains beyond the good and evil. So So this is not the answer by me. It is said by a very famous German philosopher, Nietzsche. And he said that. I just want to say that in order to answer the question, the good and the bad side of state ownership, you need not only to have an economic observation, but also have a philosophical observation. Okay, so it's very obvious that it doesn't work again. Jason?
Jason, we need you again.
The famous Jason.
So
it's very obvious that the state ownership dominance that there in the Chinese market. And you can view the Chinese government as a one owner for all the media enterprises there. That's one view. So with that view, China can be the country market that is most that has highest concentration level. But in our study, and we prefer to view China as such a market. We do have a different kind of market. We do have different kind of government. Okay. So should I do that?
No, this for some reason.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, no, it's working.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Now it's working.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So some view Chinese government as a single firm, but we prefer to view it as a market with various state organizations, but they are independent from each other through the government common control. So with this view, and we can see different parts of the organizations and different levels of government owns certain media properties. So this is what Joe said, internal pluralism. So probably you can achieve that through this way. And this is the table in our chapter. I'm not going to elaborate more on that. So even we have the government ownership dominance, but there is obvious regional segmentation there in China. There is a deep regionalism among Chinese provinces promoted by local government to create greater economic autonomy there. And many local governments have their own agendas. It's different from the central government agenda. And many of these agendas are not very much political oriented, but economic oriented. So we would like to pursue more economic revenues instead of political goals. So this is very obvious in China because a different level of the government, provincial governments, they also have their economic goal to achieve. So they have different goals, rather economic oriented. And it is particularly true in TV broadcasting and newspaper sectors. So stands of this media are highly homogenized on national level, but their editorial style is much more diversified at provincial or at the regional level. And these media organizations have achieved increasing commercial revenue from their local region, and also they are going to achieve more revenues from the region outside their local market. So that's the market segmentation. And with this kind of market segmentation, we are be able to achieve more media pluralism there in China as well.
They don't want you to speak. Too much conspiracy theory if you live in Turkey.
I just try.
The problem is the word pluralism.
Yes, here we are. So the state has recognized the importance of pluralism, so we encourage more freedom on the day-to-day operational practice there in Chinese media organizations. And also we see there are more private firms growing there in China. Striking examples such as Baidu, which is the leading search engine company there in China, dominates the market. We don't have Google there in China. Instead, we have Baidu. And also for internet companies, there is no state-owned internet companies. All the internet companies are private-owned there, so which provide more diversified voice there in the market. So I'm going to skip that. And so to summarize, to conclude, state ownership dominance there in China, but we have obviously very high local autonomy to encourage more diversity, and that is much more on the economic goal instead of political goal. And also new media allows more diversified our voices, and the rise of social media also creates fast-growing platform for more pluralism. Recently, back to 2 weeks ago, there is an issue. There is TPP called the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. That's agreement among 12 different countries that was signed among 12 countries, but China was not included there. So there was a hot debate, hot discussion on the Chinese media. And then we did an investigation. We found that like only 10% of the source of this news come from the mainstream media, come from the media owned by the Chinese government. 90% of the news and discussion actually it goes through the media, either private owned or they go through majorly on the social media platform. So you can see that even we have a high level of state ownership, but still there is increasingly more freedom of our voices there in the country. So to answer this question, our answer is even there is change, beyond answering whether it's good or not, beyond good or evil, we still dance, and we try to dance in a better way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just you made a very interesting point about the local media and the national media, and you mentioned that their agendas are different; they don't converge. Can you see this tension? Whether there is a tension in the editorial coverage, the news coverage?
Yes, because so the local government for the news source, it's still highly homogenized with the state news source. But there are a lot of the other discussions on the entertainment, on the culture, on the social issues that is much more localized, and they have more freedom, have different voices in that region.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Chinese case has similarity between Turkish cases in terms of regional media, journalists, and also local. But there is no really comparative research study and empirical evidence. I am talking about internationally as well. But really interesting because China is the highest concentration, then South Africa. Turkey is the third. According to findings of this project, but has a lot of similarity between Chinese media system.
Thank you. Now the floor goes to Ben Compaine, Senior Fellow at Columbia Institute for Teleinformation, who will talk about state ownership of media.
Okay, so I'm supposed to start talking about the U.S., and of course there's not much in the way of U.S. state media ownership. Those of you who are American know that the closest we get is the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which was started in 1967, very convoluted. The bottom line there is the public television in this country public media gets about 15% of its budget through the federal government, and that comes out to about $1.40 per person per year, so not much. What I did want to look at, but one thing I don't know if the book talked about, because I haven't seen it, is the increase in the interest of public, municipally owned infrastructure for broadband. And we're seeing an increase in the number of municipalities, cities, that are interested in, since they're unhappy with the broadband being provided by the monopoly providers, Comcast, Time Warner, in each city, we're seeing increased interest. I'm on the Broadband Commission in the city of Cambridge, and folks there want the city to build a new fiber optic city-owned system. Stockholm was very successful with that. You may be aware that they built a network infrastructure with dark fiber, which they then sell out. I think Netherlands has a system of a little higher level. So that's one area that probably hasn't been on the radar of many folks when you talk about media ownership, and that's municipally owned, not state-owned in the sense of the government. What I want to do then here is sort of go back and look at the gestalt, some of the big picture that goes across the 30 countries that were studied here. And if I can figure out this particular gizmo. Yep. Among the 30 countries that were studied in the book, the U.S. had the highest number of independent voices, about 59 voices. However, on a per capita basis, it was fairly low. It was under one voice, one voice per million in the U.S., whereas in Europe, it's something over 3 voices per million. In general, the study found that smaller countries tended to have a higher voice count, and Ireland, Finland, Switzerland were among the highest. And some of the largest countries by population had the smallest number of voices. Brazil, Mexico, and as we've heard, depending on how you count it, China would be in that category. However, state ownership of media across the 30 countries has generally been declining, small, and there are some differences between platform ownership and content ownership. The decline in content ownership has been a little greater than platform ownership. Even in China, I think as we've heard from Min, that though platform ownership is still pretty much state-owned, in terms of content ownership, there is, through the internet and through some of the regional, there is some decline, although still fairly high by international standards. Around the world, the state-owned media is still pretty prevalent in some places. Egypt is, and Russia, fairly high, even South Korea, all above 30% of the content media are owned by the state. Even some countries that are privatized, a lot of the telecom and mobile still have very large percentages owned by state companies. Germany, 38% still owned. Japan, 34%. Sweden, 37%. France, 27%. Another, I think, thing that I tweaked out of the data that was surprising is that through the 90s, there was a lot of liberalization, especially in radio broadcasting. And despite that liberalization, you still find that here we go again. Where will this take me? Okay. We can get back to, in radio, that the state-owned radio broadcasters, BBC and around, have been rather robust in maintaining market share, in part by, I assume, meeting certain market needs that still need to be met. So just because there's competition doesn't necessarily mean that there's no room for these. Some of the findings from this study confirm some other data from the World Bank that I was going to talk about, but I'm going to sort of skip that for now and talk about some of the broader things. One is that concentration in, these are findings from the study, concentration in news media is associated with less economic development. News media attention, as we heard from Ellie this morning, news media attention is not always associated with revenue, because in many cases, the news media that are state-owned are not necessarily interested in revenue or profit. It's more for getting certain kinds of information out. With all the concentration that we sometimes hear about the media moguls, the Berlusconis, the Murdochs, the fact is that media attention in the BRICS far outweighs the media attention of the privately owned companies when you measure it in terms of total number of users and viewers because of the huge impact, the weighting of China and India and Brazil and Indonesia. So what are some of the conclusions from all of this? One is that because of an increasingly global media system, the number of voices per capita is likely to decline, and the aggregate number of voices is likely to decline. Paradoxically, though, if you think about it, most users will have more options than they have today than with just the national market. And you see a little bit of that, let's say in this country, and Ellie alluded to this. On the one hand, most people in this country, in the US, have one daily newspaper. So there are lots of daily newspapers in this country, but most people have just one local paper, maybe access to the Wall Street Journal, maybe the New York Times. Now, even though on the internet, just a handful of news sources predominate, CNN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Yahoo, Associated Press, from the point of view of the individual, most people now have more sources to get information from than they had before the internet, when they only had 1, 2 newspapers. So even though there might be some concentration on the internet side, for the individual, there actually may be more sources, diverse sources. And that's something that we might see globally. This brings up some implications. One is for localism. Another is for how much governments what will they do to preserve levels of national voices, particularly from a cultural standpoint. We've seen that for a long time in places like France and Canada, where there are regulations to require certain amounts of national content. How much of that will continue as these trends, these global trends persist? We also see that cross-ownership across media tends to be higher in well-developed media markets. So that is likely to continue as you get more economic development around the world. The question is, will there be counter forces from government regulation to prevent or discourage the cross-media ownership? So for the grand question of pros and cons of state ownership, I think what we heard some from this morning is that there is no single answer. From a pluralism perspective, as opposed to just an economic perspective of economies of scale, the notion of pluralism, we could say that the least concerning level of state ownership might be for content neutral infrastructure. Wow. Probably you can live with that more. Most concerning might be dominant content providers. The most rational thing we can probably think is that developing countries will need infrastructure that may have to be state-owned, and we may have to accept that that's the way to go. And perhaps the least acceptable then is the developing countries with willing competitive suppliers somehow constraining them. So that's where I come out on that and from the data.
Thank you. We have 6 minutes for comments, questions.
Sure. Don't want to have any awkward silence in here, so I'll try to kick off some noise. Ming Hong, my questions are for you. And I wonder if, I understand what you're trying to do. I understand that you don't want to paint a China as in monochromatic colors, right? Because I lived in China in 1989, and now obviously the media environment is so much different than it was then, and we need to somehow bring out that variety and the transformations that are taking place and the real opportunities for certain, okay? So that's absolutely necessary. But it seems to me that while wanting to do that, you are turning a blind eye, and I think it's deeply problematic, and it's also a very political move, right? And you're positioning yourself, as a scholar on the political spectrum in a certain way. And here's what I see the move, and the problematic move is at two levels. You're focusing on separate entities, but you don't want to focus on economic ownership. So here, in Canada, when I do this, I have to make a distinction between legal ownership and economic ownership, all right? Because sometimes a single firm will own two separate legal entities, right? And if I measure them differently, I get if I measure them as two separate legal entities, I get more diversity. But ultimately, it's a single owner. Okay, so that's one point. The second point is you're confusing two levels of control, right? And it's basic kind of sociology, which is, you have structural control, which works at a broad macro level, and it works at the ability to set policy directions, to control the distribution of resources, and so on. And it doesn't have to meddle in the day-to-day business, which is operational control. You're focusing only in on operational control. And you're asking us not to kind of look over here. Why this hesitance to go across the two levels and still achieve what you want to do, but not with the ramifications?
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your comment. I think that's very relevant. As I said, that what we want to do is that we still want to keep dancing, but there is certain kind of social reality there. The social reality there is that we still have the government, either from the economic perspective or from the enterprise control perspective. So the major media enterprises are controlled by the government. We cannot decide whether there is structural control or not. This is not a decision we can make at this stage. But what we can do as a start point is to have gradually more freedom at the operational level. So I think I just want to say that we try to observe this issue considering the social reality there. So a lot of goals you cannot achieve overnight. But then if you see the process approaching that goal, that is also valuable and meaningful. So I don't know whether I have answered the question or not. Yes?
A question here first.
Maybe I missed it, but state ownership needs definitely be differentiated, and I think it was all happening in the study, because it's a very different kind of state ownership if we have an immediately controlled by government media structure versus a public broadcasting system, for example. I just don't want to dive deeper into that. But although with a public broadcasting system where you have instances of transparency involved, where you have all kinds of public control, and at best some kind of a body which prevents the state to influence media content, I think that's very, very crucial to make this distinction. So yes, both are related to some kind of state involvement, but no, on the one hand, we have an immediate control of the media, like, for example, possibly in China, and on the other hand, in the Netherlands, France, Germany, there are structures to try at least to prevent any immediate interference with the media. I think that's very, very crucial to make this distinction.
This is very important, and just to add to that, I think the role of funding actually in these places is crucial, because the funding is coming directly from the taxpayers. In the UK, the license fee is the main. You can argue that this is a mass form of state funding, but it's not. There is a model there, and there is a tradition where people actually pay. And the latest surveys in the UK show that actually people, roughly 70% of the people want to pay that.
Just Very briefly, because I have been in the Netherlands, funnily enough, been involved in some media commissions creating or suggesting some things. One is the tax model, which is still closer to a potential danger of state control. The other is a completely independent public, what do you call it, contribution, so that it is independent of any tax. So the government can never say, no, we need to reduce because it's completely different.
Thank you. Question here.
Similar question to you. I think that I think we must differentiate between state ownership and the public service ownership. Public service ownership quite is not, as you said, is controlled by the state, even though it's funded by the government or the public organizations. And that's why you have some, I think, to me, it seems to me that wrong interpretation on the, for instance, for South Korea, the state ownership on media content is 30%. Definitely not. It's wrong, actually, because those contents are from public service media, including public service broadcasting. Public service is very strong in Korea. That's why it is such a wrong interpretation as made, I think.
So may I make a comment?
Yeah, quick, and then we go to Sergey.
Or maybe let him ask.
I have a terribly politically incorrect question for Min Yang. Even though I agree that there are significant differences between, let's say, central government media, local government media, we hold differences between different mayors and boroughs, and also public institutions that may have media of their own, and even commercially financed, selling advertising and all that. But my question basically deals, because of my sheer ignorance about your fascinating country, which is China. Does it make any difference in all those settings, all different types of media, if you were a militant of the Communist Party? If you belong to the Communist Party, does it make any difference in terms of state ownership of the media or public?
Is state ownership different?
I mean, does it make a difference if you are a militant and party member?
I'm not party member
No,
myself.
but I know, but I'm asking you about in the public media and all these.
She wouldn't be here.
Does it make any difference? I mean, to work and to manage one of these media outlets, do you really need to be? Can you be someone not from the Communist Party?
That's two different concepts. The government and that's two different concepts in one dimension, but it's the same concept in the other dimension. Economically, so the government ownership and the party ownership is different, because we have a lot of the firms which is not controlled by the Communist Party, but they are probably attached with the organizations without the party background. But then, even we have that kind of media organization, they have the background without the party intervention. Their overflow of the information still need to go through scrutiny of the party. I don't know whether I have explained your question. So it's like
Being a communist gives you some kind of privilege for get hold of what media are. As an individual.
So we do have the party media. For example, in China, we have CCTV, we have People's Daily, and they clearly declare themselves as party media. Then we do have a lot of the other media organizations, we call them as market-oriented media organizations. This is the way we differentiate themselves. So there are a lot of differences in there, as I said before, the daily operational activities and practices. But for the news source and news reporting, and it's still like one source controlled by, you can say it's by the government or by the party. So in the news production and news flow is strictly controlled by the party.
Okay.
Is that clear?
We have Huseyin and two more comments, and I will continue this after.
So I think the purpose of this panel was to find the answer, the question, how the media should be optimally organized in order to better accomplish its public role. This question is directly linked to the issue of media ownership, state versus privately owned, as well as issues of concentration and ownership, cross-ownership. And in addition to that, in order to find better answer to that, I think we have to include from the media and communication studies four important concepts. First is political parallelism. Maybe the guy is privately owned, but very politically parallel, doing everything whatever government tells him, and we see many examples. The second is the message pluralism, the diversity of the view of points. And media pluralism, it is totally two different concepts, also they look alike. And I think one of these things as well, the content analysis, the news, and what kind of things are present to the public. Thank you.
Can I add something there to your question? Because here for us, the discussion is not the state ownership or not, or the party ownership or not. For us, the relevant discussion is rather how can we improve pluralism within such kind of the structure. So
Thank you. The last two, Alfonso, and then the last comment.
Okay, that's linked with me, but goes to previous Joe's comment about state-owned media in Europe. I'm not sure if you will agree with me, but it seems to me that in Europe we have like two traditions. First one is in the north, where state-owned media has as an aim the idea of foster pluralism, to foster the sector of independent production for TV, for instance, to add more voices in the market, to have some more innovation or less market-oriented outlet and so on. And I think that's pretty much the tradition of the north. But we have also the tradition of the south and east of the continent, which is almost the opposite. Okay, just to.
Yeah. And the very last one, very quick.
Yes. And it's not a question, it's a suggestion. I mean, I would really love us, or whoever, to just very simply, as we would do with a company, with a state, with everyone, look at mission statements and codes of conduct of each individual company, and whether it's state or not state, because there you probably would find what are the ideals, what are the reference points. Do we find pluralism? Do we find independence of editors or not? It's a simple way, it could be done.
Thank you very much. 7 minutes beyond the schedule. Thank you very much.